Today we are going to test cheap versus expensive ND filters for landscape photography. And we're gonna see if this bad boy here is worth the extra money. So let's go. So one of the first tools that you're going to need for long exposure photography is of course ND filters. The thing is, ND filters can be pretty expensive. So today we're going to test my main system, which is the Nisi V5 Pro, which is this square filter system, which is pretty expensive. I think the old set that I have, which is 2 NDs, 1 soft grad, and the holder system plus the polarizer that I actually never use, is about $700, maybe $800. So pretty expensive. We're gonna test this against this really cheap screw-in filters from Kenko. I have 2 of these. These are like 20 or 30 bucks for each one. So I have a 6-stop and a 10-stop for this system, and I have a 4-stop and a 10-stop for this. So they're not exactly the same, but we'll do with what we have here. So I'm gonna try these separately, and then I'm gonna stack them together and get 16 stops and 14 stops and see how the image quality changes between these 2 systems. So let's go. Alright, we're back in the studio. I just copied all the files into my computer. I do have my coffee here. Let's see. Oh, it's not actually that good. Anyway, let's go into Lightroom and see how it goes. Okay, so here we are inside of Lightroom. I copied my images and I gave them a different color so it's easier to understand which is which. So this is my reference image that I shot without any filter. Then I have 3 images that I shot with my cheap filter. So this one is the 4 stops, the 10 stops, and the 14 stops. And then I do have my Nisi shots. This one is with 6 stops, 10 stops, and 16 stops. So there's a little bit of a difference here, but I compensated for the exposure. So the overall image quality should be the same. So yeah, let's jump into it. Let's see the first image. I didn't do anything to these. It's exactly straight out of camera. So yeah, this is the overall sharpness. As you can see here is very sharp. It's a boring shot, but it's just for, you know, test purposes. So I don't think this guy is gonna get many waves today. Okay, so this is the first image, and then let's jump into the Kenko ones. Alright, so cheap filter, 4 stops. Looks the same to me. Can you see any difference? I can't. And this is 10 stops with the cheap filters. Still looks fine to me. I can see a little bit of yellow here, but the sun was popping up a little bit every now and then, so that might be the reason. And then if you stack up those 2 filters together, you get to 13 stops. And this is the overall image quality. I can definitely see a little bit of a color cast here. Not so strong though. And I can definitely see a little bit of vignetting here in the corners if we compare it to the base exposure. Oh, sorry, this one. But nothing really strong. Again, reference image. Let's move on to the expensive filters. So the first one is the Nisi 6 stop ND, and as you can see, the quality is all there. The image is sharp. I can't see any color cast. Let's move on to 10 stops. And again, the colors look the same to me. The exposure is pretty much the same. Again, a little bit of yellow here, but that's because the sun was popping up. And then let's move on to 16 stops. So this one was the longest exposure. I think it was, yeah, a little bit more than 6 minutes, 6.5 minutes. So you can definitely see there is a bit of a color cast here going on. If you compare it to the base exposure, you can see this is really blue or purple, let's say, and this one is a little bit more reddish magenta. And the thing is, the more filters you stack upon each other, the more you have the chance to get some color cast, so that's to be expected. Plus the sun was rising up from here, and while I was shooting this exposure particularly, I got some strong sunlight coming up, which I think is the reason why we have this color cast in the first place. So it's not about the filter, it's about the sun coming up, which didn't happen with the 14 stops here. So by looking at these one by one, it's kind of difficult to see the difference, but let's compare the cheap ones with the expensive ones. So first of all, let's do the 4 stop against the 6 stops. So this is 4, this is 6. As you can see, the shutter speed is still not so long, it's just half a second. So colors are basically the same, rendering is the same, sharpness is the same, nothing to worry about there. And then 10 stops and 10 stops. Let's see the difference. So this is the cheap one, expensive one, cheap one, expensive one. You can definitely see there is a little bit of a shift in the color, which is to be expected because all filters are made in a slightly different way with slightly different materials. So you're never gonna get exactly the same color. Plus, you will never find this out if you don't check different brands at the same time with the same image, you know? You would only see either this image or this image in a normal environment. So I don't think there's nothing to worry about there. The sharpness is the same, the rendition is the same, nothing to worry about. And then let's see when you stack filters together. So this is 14, this is 16. Cheap filter, expensive filter. Cheap filter, expensive filter. The sharpness is the same. As I said, there is a different color cast because of the sun coming up. I can see definitely a little bit more of vignetting in the 14 stops, especially in this area, but it's actually not that strong, and I think it can be corrected. Remember that until now I didn't edit these images, they're just straight out of camera. So let's see what happens when we edit these images and put them together. So let's start editing the base exposure. So I'm gonna go into the develop module. I'll do my usual editing. So I'll enable the profile corrections, chromatic aberrations, and I'm going to switch my color to my monochrome in camera with red filter. I'm not gonna do a super accurate editing here. I just want to get a little bit less of these highlights, and I want to get a little bit more of contrast here. Nothing really fancy. Might get a little bit of dehaze, and then I'll make a gradient filter for the sky to make it darker. Yeah, something like that. And then I just want to crop this to a square like I usually do. Make sure everything is leveled, and I probably want to place the island here. Okay, my 2-minute edit of this image. Now I'm gonna copy all these settings here, check all, then I'm gonna Alt Shift, click on all the images, and click on sync so I can sync everything. And let's see the difference when you start shooting black and white. So 4 stops, 6 stops. Let's see if there is any difference. 4 stops, 6 stops. These look the same, right? This is a little bit brighter, but I think it's because I compensated for the exposure, so you can just make it a little bit darker afterwards. But as far as rendition, they're basically the same. Then let's try 10 stops against 10 stops. So this is the cheap 10 stops, expensive 10 stops. Can you see any difference? Because I can't. All right, and finally 14 against 16. So this is 14 stops with my cheap filter, and this is 16 stops with my expensive filter. And honestly, there is no difference, which is crazy. I mean, there is of course a little bit of a difference in the exposure time, because this one was longer. This one is 6.5 minutes, and this one is much less, 100 seconds. But they look pretty much the same. One thing that I can see in the cheap filters, it looks like the shadows are always a little bit darker, and the expensive one, the Nisi ones, they tend to be a little bit more uniform from shadows to highlights, which is a good indication of a good glass and a good filter. But apart from that, I can see a little bit more of white here in the 14 stops. But that's again because of the difference in exposure to compensate for the 2 stops, and because the sun came out, so there's always going to be a slight difference between one image and the other. But overall, I have to say I'm shocked that these really cheap filters are almost the same as the expensive ones. Wow. So yeah, I think if you only shoot black and white, really there is no difference, at least that I can see. Pretty amazing. Alright, that was the comparison. What do you think? I think looking at the image quality, I was actually shocked because there's not so much difference. So which is the better option? I think it really depends on you and your type of photography. So if you do everything in color, if you're using really wide angle lenses, and if you like to stack up filters on each other, maybe this is the better option for you. But if you shoot in black and white, if you crop all the images, then this is definitely a viable option. Personally, I don't like to choose, so I just use both depending on the situation. So the Nisi V5 Pro is my main system, and I like it because I can stack 3 filters together with a polarizer. I can use graduated ND filters together, which gives me a lot of flexibility. But for all the occasions where I'm in the middle of a rainstorm or in the middle of a snowstorm in really bad conditions like you see behind me in Hokkaido, these are actually my choice because they're smaller, they're easier to put in your pocket. You can put a lens hood over your lens while you're using them, and you cannot do that with these, so they get all wet. So yeah, bad conditions or anytime you don't want to carry a lot of stuff, these are perfectly fine. Alright, that's it for today's video. Hopefully you found it useful. If you did, remember to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, leave some comments below, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao! And the thing is, ND filters can be pretty expensive, especially if you're just starting out and you're not really sure if you want to do long exposure. So I think it's worth to mention that this is not a scientific test by any means. This is just a wartime. So one of the first things that you're going to need when you do wind. I just copied the pictures, blah 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 blah. Actually pretty interesting for me to see how the image quality look like. Right, so that was the comparison. What do you think? I think it's what subscribe to the channel, leave some comments below. It really subscribe to the channel, ring my bell, tell me to jump off a cliff, so consider subscribing, ring my bell, share, comment, send the link to your friends, tell your mama that I like her.